Guided Reading Lesson 16, Wonderstruck. I am reading this book to my Year 5 class with permission from Scholastic. So this was the last page that we got up to, and I asked you in your guided reading lesson, does this page give us any clues as to what might happen next? So I just want you to have another look as I zoom in at anything that you think might be a clue. We are going to begin with Ben's story. The file stretched from one end of the huge hall to the other. Each drawer had a silver handle and a little frame card indicating what was inside. Ben ran the length of the hallway until he came to the section of files for the letter D. He counted and was amazed that there were 58 different drawers, all labelled dioramas. One by one, he opened them and found hanging files stuffed with papers and photographs, legal pads and notes. Seemed to be files for every single diorama in the entire museum, but nothing labelled Gunflint Lake. There were no files for wolves either. He tried Minnesota and night before figuring out they were organised by halls. He found a little tab with the words Hall of North American Mammals typed on a small white card. He flipped past the files labelled Alaska Brown Bear, Canoe Bay, Alaska Peninsula, Jaguar, Box Cannon, near Guaymas, Western Sonora, Mexico, and Wapti, Trappers Lake Basin, Horseshoe Range, Colorado. Finally, he came to Wolf, Gunflint Lake, Minnesota. There were 4 files with that title. Ben took a deep breath and opened them. The first file, he saw a beautiful photograph of birds, animals and trees that he knew well, like black-billed cuckoos, gulls, raccoons, otters, aspen, white spruce and birch. Most were black and white, but a few were in colour. There were photos of the arching sky, the Gunflint stones and wide expanses of snow. Some pictures were out of focus and a few had arrows and circles drawn on them with a pen. On the bottom of most of the photos it said 1965. In the second file, Ben found drawings of Gunflint Lake. There were pictures of trees and the lake he'd left behind and every square inch of the property all round his house, as well as the sky at day and night and the phases of the moon. The drawings were done in pencil or charcoal and the lines were swift and bold. Ben saw a sketch that he recognised immediately as a cabin on his family property and he shivered. The third file was filled with hundreds of sketches of wolves in every possible position. Ben marvelled at the way they ran and sat and jumped across the pages. Their eyes were bright and with intelligence, and he could almost feel the muscle beneath the fur. The fourth file contained legal papers, contracts, letters, receipts, charts, and tickets. A little slip of paper, folded in half, was wedged in the bottom of the file. He unfolded it and saw it was a receipt. The purple ink was faded, but he could read the date, 1969. On the back was a handwritten note in black ink. Dinner tomorrow. Meet at Kincaid's, 8 p.m. Love, M. Kincaid's? M? Ben felt a faint ripple of electricity rush across the surface of his skin. Was this the same Kincaid he'd been looking for? And was it the same M who'd written a note inside Wonderstruck? A shadow stretching across the files at the end of the hallway caught Ben's attention. Someone was coming. Ben panicked and grabbed the files. Stealing them was easier than he would have guessed. No one tried to stop him as he moved through the museum holding the precious papers. Once he was safely inside the secret room, he closed the door, placed the files on the floor and collapsed onto the fur. He laid aside the first 3 files and opened the 4th one. Carefully, he slipped the receipt with the note about Kincaid's into his pocket. Ben continued to thumb through the rest of the file, past meaningless papers and ledgers until a carbon copy of a letter caught his eye. It was an official-looking stationery from the museum. May 12, 1964. Dear Miss Wilson, I'm writing to you as an employee of the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. I've recently agreed to undertake an exciting assignment to create a new diorama based on the flora and fauna of the Gunflint Lake region of Minnesota. My colleagues and I plan to arrive in Minneapolis sometimes in October, and then we will travel by car up to the lake region, which I understand is about a 5-hour trip. Since you are the town librarian, I'm reaching out to you, hoping you might be able to help as we research all the elements needed for the creation of a diorama. We plan to spend about 2 months in Gunflint Lake to give us adequate time to understand the land and the animals. It's our sincere wish to work with you. I'll be sketching and taking extensive photographs during the course of the entire trip. At the moment, we are also looking for places we can stay. Any suggestions you might have would be greatly appreciated. You can contact me at the address above. Thank you very much. Daniel Lobel, Exhibition Proprietor, the American Museum of Natural History. As this is part of Rose's story, where do you think Rose is looking at this moment? Do they look like they're still in New York, or do you think that they are now somewhere else? What do you think? Do you think that they're going back to Rose's house? Is he taking her back to her dad? Ben rushed through the museum until he arrived at the information desk in the entrance hall. He was sure his heart was going to come crashing through his chest. He ran to the front of the line and said breathlessly, "I'm looking for Daniel Lobel. He works here." The woman started speaking, but Ben interrupted her. "I need to find him right now. He's my dad." The woman's lips moved again. Ben thought she was asking him if he was lost. "Please, just look him up." The woman seemed worried. She glanced back at the long line of people waiting to ask her a question, then put on her glasses and pulled out a black book from one of the drawers in her desk. Stamped in white on the cover of the book were the words Museum Directory, 1976 to 1977. She flipped through the pages, brought the book close to her face and frowned. She then turned to Ben. Her mouth moved as she shook her head. "He's got to be there. Look him up. Again, please." The woman put her finger to her lips, and he knew he must have been speaking too loudly. She ran her fingers down one of the pages, then turned the book towards Ben, showing him the names Liskey, Catherine, and Logan, Michael. She tapped the names, indicating that his father's name would have been between them if he worked at the museum. Ben felt his whole body sag. The woman closed the book, picked up the phone, smiled in a strained way, and said something. Ben watched as she spoke into the phone, hung up and raised one hand, indicating he should wait. Had she called someone who knew Daniel? Ben hopped from foot to foot, impatiently waiting. As the woman turned to help other people in the line, he watched the minutes tick by on a clock behind her desk. At last, she nodded towards someone on the other side of the room. Ben spun around. To his horror, a guard was heading towards them. The one must have called security. Ben ran into the crowd and disappeared back into the museum. His heart raced. His thoughts spun. Even if his dad didn't work at the museum anymore, surely someone here must remember him. Using Jamie's keys, he made his way back to the workroom where he and Jamie had explored the night before. He pushed open the door and said, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." Inside, two young men were hunched over their desks. A young woman in the corner poured some kind of liquid into a mould. All three of them looked up when Ben entered the room. "I'm looking for Daniel Lobel," he said. "He used to work here. He made the wolf diorama." The three workers looked at one another and shook their heads. Two of them started speaking at the same time and tried to figure out what they were saying. One of the men got up and walked towards Ben. He couldn't read his lips, but he was sure he knew what he was saying. None of them knew his father. Before they could call security, Ben darted out of the room and ran as fast as he could. Soon he found himself back at the wolf diorama. Out of breath, he knelt down and stared into the wolf's eyes. They seemed to burn with secrets Ben was sure he'd never know. He put his hand up against the sheet of glass that separated him from the running wolves. He pictured them leaping towards him through the glass and swallowing him whole. Ben didn't know how long he stayed there before he finally returned to the secret room. The files lay scattered across the floor. He read through them again and noticed that all the correspondences relating to his father stopped in 1969, and he figured that must have been when he left the museum. Ben ran his hands along the cluttered shelves, searching for a good place to store the papers. For the first time, he noticed how fancy the shelves were, with all sorts of curly shapes and elaborate designs carved into the supports. Why would anyone decorate a storage room? All at once, Ben remembered the checkerboard pattern on the floor. He moved aside the caveman fur, grabbed an old piece of cloth and rubbed away the dirt. More the pattern appeared. It looked as if it had been painted to look like marble. Ben studied it and gazed again at the fancy shelves. The whole room started to feel oddly familiar. Ben had been in this room for a few days now, but he realised he hadn't been looking at it. Behind the furniture, piled in the corner of the room, was a rectangular object about foot taller than he was. It was covered in a tattered old piece of fabric with huge water stains. Ben walked over and moved the furniture aside. As he pulled off the cloth, a cloud of dust rose up, and he coughed. Beneath the fabric was an old wood cabinet. The front was filled with little drawers and doors, each with a small picture on it. A few broken seashells and a piece of coral were attached to the top of the cabinet. Ben couldn't stop staring at it. His skin started buzzing again as he realised what he was looking at. The shelves, the floor, the cabinet, they were all exactly the same as the illustration he'd seen in Wonderstruck. He was standing inside his father's book. How do you think Rose is feeling? Right, we're going to leave it at that page there.